I come from a family that they believe they are descendants of the old gods. That's the best way to say it. And that's descendants of this hierarchical ruling species that is from the celestial realm that descended in the days of Jared and came down and procreated with the daughters of men, and that they still trace their seed line back to Gilgamesh till Nimrod.
This man here claims to be a descendant of the Nephilim, and it's absolutely going to blow your mind. So we're going to be reacting to it and giving my commentary all the way through. Shout out to the confessionals.
So you come from a family that I've seen described online. I don't know if you describe it this way, but you come from a family that people describe it as a Illuminati family. Mm-hmm. Is that how you would describe it?
That's not how I would describe it in the same way. I'll be honest. I think it's just a popular catchphrase that a lot of people are borrowing into. No, I come from a family that they believe they are descendants of the old gods. That's the best way to say it. That they believe that they are carriers of a seed line that gives them the divine right to rule. And that is what gives them justification spiritually, emotionally, psychologically, scientifically to dominate the lesser species known as humans.
They think they're from the bloodline of the sons of God, which is Nephilim. The Nephilim. Guys, this is just blowing my mind. I never thought that anyone thought that. And what makes them different, though? That's the thing, though. Like, how in the world are they any more special?
It literally means a lesser species of man, and they do not believe they are a human. In the same way, they believe they are something other than, and that's descendants of this hierarchical ruling species that is from the celestial realm that descended in the days of Jared and came down and procreated with the daughters of men, and that they still trace their seed line back to Gilgamesh till Nimrod. And so this is what the dynastic,
which is the Nephilim,
believe they have, is a superiority in their genetics on one side and the ability to commune with the divine. And so their children are progenitors of these, some might call them abreactions, mutations, these skills, psychic abilities, that kind of stuff, all variants of it. And so they raise up their children in this path with which involves a tremendous amount of shattering of the soul and the identity so that there's compartmentalization within. And it allows them the ability to train their child up in a way that makes them conducive towards the family. I call them the family. That's what I called them. You know, it's a better word for mafia than anything else. But no, we didn't call ourselves, like my family wouldn't ever call themselves Illuminists. Yeah. Right? They're Luciferian. That's for certain. They worship Hallel and Shahar, as he's really known, but different reasons than what people are ascribed to.
They worship Hallel? Who's that? That's crazy.
Interesting. All right, so I want you to start from the beginning of what your childhood was like and just walk us through this. But before you do, you just said something that I got to ask you before I forget. Are what they believe, do you believe is true in the sense of them being able to trace back their lineage to the fallen?
Some of them, yes. I believe they absolutely can.
Do you think that's in your blood?
I believe it was, yeah. I believe it is.
Wow. So this guy believes this stuff. That's insane. So instead of making them giants, they just have special powers where they're like psychic abilities and special enhances within their body. That's crazy.
I believe there's no way to physiologically necessarily. My blood's been augmented a lot over the years. I volunteered for a lot of stuff and said yes to everything that they could ever give me that would make me better than what I was. I was on a desperate quest for relief. And so I volunteered for all kinds of stuff, and I volunteered for stuff that was transhuman in its nature.
Really?
And it augmented me quickly, you know?
What does that mean?
That was brutal. Because then there's this, I lived a lot longer than I expected. Let me just put it that way. I did not think I would ever see 18. Never even comprehended the idea that I would ever know a family that wasn't this other thing where the powers of control and access were given through the abuse of children. That's what I knew as normal. And I knew that people were corrupt.
People are corrupt. And people are very evil. And if they are part of the bloodline, the thing is, God destroyed them. That's the thing. So some people think that the fallen angels, the sons of God, had daughters with men, with humans, again, after the flood. And according to that, they would be very vile and evil people.
And monsters. And were willing to devour each other to rise to the top. I understood what wolves were when they ran the world. And so it was very hard for me to get to a place where I could believe that I could be redeemed, because I had witnessed enough of things in the families that make it seem like I am irredeemable forever. And it took me, there was one book that made a massive difference in that, which was called The Gospel to Every Creature. And I believe it's written by John Darnell. It is very hard to find. I have a copy,
The Gospel to Every Creature.
but it's been scrubbed. And it's the good news to Nephilim, vampires, and transhumans, and it helped me to.
What the Gospel to Every Creature? I gotta look this up. It's the good news to every. It seems that science can mix different species of animals, including human, and engineer whatever outcome of desired. Humans' genes are being mixed with the genes of animals, plants. What? And for those who can accept it, with the genes of fallen angels. Wow. The question is, this book explores how the gospel message relates to controversial aspects of humanity, especially focusing on existence of individuals who may not be fully human, such as Nephilim, or those who are genetic modified. Darnell raises questions about whether Jesus' sacrifice applies to these individuals and argues for a compassionate approach towards them. I had no idea that was even an idea. Did you guys know this? This is wild. Could this guy be part of the Nephilim?
That maybe I was an anathema, that maybe just because I have this seed line in me, that maybe just because I'm a progenitor of the offspring of the fallen, that it doesn't mean that I'm not able to be redeemed, because no matter what, by blood or by belief, I believe that we have a Messiah that overcame and we can overcome by the blood of the Lamb and the words of our testimony.
Wow. So he believes in Jesus? Is that what he's saying in the sacrifice that Jesus did for him on the cross? What a turn.
And not loving our lives when faced with death. And it was that powerful encounter with the Almighty, with the true judge of all the earth, who I can make an appeal to, who can give me a new bloodline, and that's what he offers to everyone. Wow. And so I do believe that's available to those that come from these families.
That's wild. I didn't. Last year in the Christmas season, I took the last 2 weeks of the year off, and I had other people host the show. And my friend Joel did an episode that he called "Good Nephilim," and he kind of goes into this idea of Nephilim being able to be redeemed.
Yeah,
and it's a concept that I feel like has not been tapped into a whole lot. And he did on my show for I think the first time, and since then he's kind of uncovered more information to back up his claims. But having a real life Nephilim here. No, I was kidding. But it's just, it kind of goes into that concept, Yeah. And so that's why I asked you, because I was like, hold on, like that's pretty wild. Like, to be like, have I ever encountered somebody who comes from that bloodline? Maybe. I mean, I've talked to a lot of people, but how many times do you come across somebody that does come from that bloodline and acknowledges it, knows it?
This is insane. What they're talking about. I've never heard this concept before. Have you guys, did God just, if the Bible says he died once and for all for mankind, all mankind, but if you're part human, I still don't know how legit this is, to be honest. I'm being very skeptical, but I'm always let's think about it. All for entertaining purposes.
Oh, that's another thing. And so that's why I wanted to ask you that. So you kind of hit on the childhood stuff right there in that kind of description. Was it something that came from complete childhood, where it's from your earliest memories it's just been kind of manipulated and jacked up? And what was that like for you growing up?
Well, my family set up a base of operations. They're from the East Coast, the Reynolds family on one side. My mother's family, just for clarity, I've never exposed a lot of the side of things that were going on with, let me say it another way. The Reynolds family on my father's side, they're all from the East Coast out here, and they're a dynastic family. My great-grandfather, a man named Don Potter Reynolds, was the architect, the head of engineering for the president, as the president of the American Society of Civil Engineering back in the 80s. And he's the one who put the new torch in the Luciferian hand of the Statue of Liberty of Columbia. And so he's a master mason Luciferian in that way. And he was so much of the shot caller for the family at that time, especially when I came into being. And but my dad left that thing and moved out to the Southwest and started a different empire. And so a lot of how it works in the families is you got two main approaches. If you've got unlimited access to wealth, power, really, I'm not talking about money. I'm talking about power, like unlimited raw power,
Wow.
where a phone call, the phone book, is far more powerful than the bank account, because it's who you know can open doors to power anywhere else in the entire world. And that's where everything was. So you can leave with nothing, but then you can go build. And if you need the phone book, there's a price to be paid. And the price to be paid is generally one of your children. This is like the reality. It seems bizarre to some, but a child is generally a chosen child out of the family is given over as an offering to the family. And they're the ones who's going to go through this left-hand path.
No.
They're going to experience the desecration of their soul, their identity, and they're going to become an agent for the family that is owned completely. And there's like a legal trustee that is given over to it. There's a board of directors that sits over it. Like, these are real legal confines for how the wealth is distributed out there. And so in order to build your empire, you got to be able to go prove yourself. And that's what he ended up doing out in the Southwest. And he moved to Arizona, an area called Flagstaff, Arizona. And where I was born, that is a place that's a high place, Mount Humphreys. It's a volcanic peaks that sit there. And the top of it is where the Hopi Indian and a lot of people had gathered forever to commune with the fallen. They believed that the sons of the sky would come down every season at the winter solstice, and they would abide from the winter solstice to the summer solstice there. And so this was a place where they would give their daughters over to them. This is Hopi mythology, like 101, and
No way. That's crazy. Literally, this is just sounding exactly like Genesis 6. They believed that they were giving their daughters over to the Nephilim. Whew. Wow.
make these Kachina dolls, which were an effigy of the what I would say is a watcher angel that would come, and the daughter would be given to him, and she would place that over her bed throughout her life, and that's her familiar spirit, right? That's where I was born into. And the people that still practice that old religion, that's the way I refer to it, they still do this. And they still take their children up there to give them over to them on these high days. And so I was born into that, and I was born through that seed line and into that ritual magic world. And but my mother's side are extreme Catholics and Jesuits through and through. And so her father ran a different operation in Southern California, which was much more based on the child exploitation side of the equation. And he operated out of Lake Havasu City, Arizona. Lake Havasu, for those of you that are unfamiliar, sits in the absolute desert border of Arizona and California, and it has the Colorado River that's been dammed up, and they created an artificial lake there. And it was a secret military base back in World War II. That was called Site 6. And it was a stopover point crossing the desert for soldiers going there. And they would made it into a rest and recuperation area. And so it was a party city from its foundation. It had a lot of underground structures that were built into it as a refueling point. And in the 1960s, a guy named Robert P. McCulloch bought it. And he bought it, and he also purchased the London Bridge that crossed the River Thames. And he had it shipped over here stone by stone. And while they were doing that, they excavated 80 bodies that were entombed inside it in a practice that's called annulment, where you would sacrifice a person and bury them alive in the walls of the foundation.
What?
And so there's all these chambers in this facility of the London Bridge where they would do torture and all kinds of ritual stuff. But this is why the sing-song nursery rhyme, the London Bridge is falling down, falling down. That's a nursery rhyme to talk about how you have to give your children over to the government so you can hold up the London Bridge. And they would literally...
Have any of you guys heard that? I've definitely heard that song. London Bridge is falling down, falling down, falling down. London Bridge is falling down. What's the next part?
Children. This is in the history book of the museum at Lake Havasu City. You can see these bodies of these children that were sacrificed inside the walls of that space. So he bought that as a charged object. He bought that as a portal mechanism. And they built in Lake Havasu City with another designer from the Disneyland, and they literally built a pleasure island. That's what it was facilitated for. And they designed it so that it would be a retirement community that would facilitate the exploitation of children. And that's exclusively what that city was founded and built for. And so the original founders of that operated out of the Knights of Columbus predominantly as a wing of the Jesuits. And that's the business down there. It's an industry to cover up child abuse. You got a bunch of old men running around with little boys, and everybody thinks they're grandchildren and nephews and nieces and all that rest. And so all along that area down there is where I would be taken from my earliest days and shattered, abused, traumatized.
Oh my goodness. What in the world? Sometimes though, I think when people have gone through abuse like that is when they come up with stories like being part of the Nephilim. And I'm not saying he's come up with it, but I wonder if because of the trauma and the mental toll that these things do to you, you come up with these cover stories to think like maybe you're from something else. But he has said that he believes in Jesus.
Systemically so. But it's for behavioral modification purposes. That's the end goal of the abuse, is to shatter your willingness to resist and to break your will.
Wow.
And once they own you and you have been woefully convinced you can never get out, you give in. And that's what happened. I became the person who I was died, and the person they wanted me to become was what was born out of that disgusting phoenix ashes,
Wow.
How long does that process take? I mean, was this like just a few years of your childhood, or was this like a constant thing throughout your teen years, or what?
I mean, every individual is different. How long does it take to break a dog? That was the approach they took with me. You find out everybody has different talents and giftings and capabilities and capacities. And so in the beginning phase, a lot of it is you're just raising them up a little more normally. There's a lot of early trauma stuff that's hard to articulate and can be messy with memory. But as I got older, like 5 and 6 years old, man, it became very apparent that I had a desire for justice. That was like the sole deepest desire that I had, was I wanted people to know freedom, because I had been so deprived of it from day one. And there's this practice of switching mothers. You'll have a cult mother, and then they have your regular mom, and then they create this trauma bonding so that you'll bond with anybody that they want you to do. And this happens.
This reminds me of that other guy who talked about growing up in a cult family, and they had him fight to the death, and they went through abuse, and he talked about, it's the Anna K. Lucas guy. Literally so similar. What in the world?
Away from your mom and your dad constantly, and giving you new mom and dad, new uncles, new aunts, right? And so you're living in this constant state of destabilization. And so it's as that destabilization happens and that patterning is built up, that's when a lot of the programming comes in to stabilize these new personalities and these new pursuits and endeavors. But I had this zealousness to see injustice stopped, and they preyed on that. And so they gave me opportunities to fight back against these perverts who were abusing children. And they would build up in me this rage, this need for vengeance. And then they would let me release that on somebody. And in the beginning, it was people I knew were bad guys I'd seen abuse children. And I would slice their throats up, man. I would tear them to freaking ribbons. And I loved
How's this guy not in jail? What? Man. So essentially they're just abusing him until he becomes literally a pawn for whatever they want him to do.
Because I finally felt like I could stop something that I knew was evil. And I thought this was the way to stop all these monsters in the world. I just wanted to hunt monsters in the night. I just wanted to go down in the tunnels and hunt. And that's what they kind of created in me, this just freak of a need to hunt. And then they would bury that away, and you go back to normal life, and you go back to Christian school, and you go back to the regular life, and your parents act like it's just normal, but they're like, you got to have cover stories for why your child's all beat up and bruised and your face is smashed in. Like, I've had multiple reconstructive plastic surgeries from fights, fighting for my stinking life. You got to have cover stories. So we would move around constantly. My parents would move us around sometimes every 6 months or not. But once you have a friend or a teacher or somebody notices, starts asking questions, or you start bonding with somebody that's outside the cult, they're not going to tolerate that. And so we would move all the time. And now my sisters on the other side, they weren't roped into this thing. I was in a male cult. This is the Brotherhood of the Snake down in Lake Havasu. But this is, my sisters weren't caught up in the same thing, but they were caught up by the family as a whole.
Oof.
And so this carried on, and we moved into this place called Show Low Pine Top, Lakeside, Arizona. And this is where an area, they would move to these specific high places where the veil is really thin. There's a very famous story about a guy who had an alien encounter out there, Snowflake, Arizona. And this is an area where I was right on the Apache reservation. White Mountain Apache Reservation was 100 yards from my door. And they would go out into the Apache reservation to these specific high places and do these rituals and this ritual magic. And a lot of that involved. That was when it was the worst to me, because I was old enough to understand how vile what was happening, in ritual magic.
Wow.
And at the same time, I was the most readily influenced by the family side of the equation. I thought the family and the military was the way out, but I hated this occult side of it because I saw men become monsters physically in front of my eyes. Other things come out of people's mouths. Other things come through their eyes. Like I witnessed enough transfiguration to know that this stuff is 100% stalking in the darkness.
Oh, what in the world? Demonic activity 101 right here. We live in an evil world. We live in a depraved time, and there's so much dark things that I could not even imagine. And we need to have the Holy Spirit with us. We need to have Jesus with us, because this is disgusting.
I don't want that to rule me forever, but it was hard to not resist. You're in it.
Well, so all right, seeing things like that, like you say, all right, so you said you saw men become monsters. Is that metaphorically or literally?
It's literally. I've seen men do nasty things like an animal, but then I've seen men become not people.
Like literally
Not
change.
be the people. Yeah.
Okay.
And there is like lycanthropy, and there's these understandings of what the Watchers are capable of doing that most people are just woefully ignorant of. And that's why they're perishing. It's because they lack a basic understanding of history. And one of the predominant understandings of what a Watcher, specific class of celestial beings, is capable of is augmenting itself. They can shapeshift. That is by their nature. They're literally called metaskizmadzotoi in the Greek in the New Testament. And it's because he says it's marvel not, because Hasatan you could say like transforms himself. That's a good word for it. But he shapeshifts himself into an angel of light. And his messengers, his apostles, disciples, they do the same thing. And he's like, this is because they are capable of becoming anything they want to be in order to deceive on one side of the equation. And that's what they'll do. And so when people start engaging in these necromantic rituals and other stuff, and they start to seek the embodiment of these celestial ones, they can get these things on them and in them, and they can't contain them. And some of these guys who are messing with this stuff, who don't come from the bloodline, are incapable of cohabitating like a parasite, and they feed off of each other, and they can't handle it. And so that's why families are recruited from these bloodlines, and children are recruited out, even if they don't know anything about it. Like you said, the vast majority of people who come from these bloodlines, there's a lot of muddying of the waters. There's a lot of purity that's been changed. There's a lot of half-breeds. There's a lot of quarter breeds, right? There's a lot of people that don't know this stuff, and they start to get into lesser magic, and all of a sudden it's like the doors of everybody open to them. But that's why. It's because they can host these things better. Whereas those that don't, they get taken over by this stuff, and they can't change back. They can't return, in a sense. Like,
wow. Oh man, what do you guys think about this? This is just crazy. There's so many wild and crazy things going on in this world, but we can trust in Jesus, that Jesus did die on the cross for your sins. When you hear things like this, sometimes it's so easy to realize that you kind of live in a bubble. I definitely do, like, where we need Jesus. But we need Jesus and realize, like, yeah, we do live in a bubble, but that's okay. I mean, God has protected me from lots of evil, disgusting things. But I know at the end of the day, some people haven't been, and they've been through lots of difficult times and hard times. That's why we got to always trust in Jesus. Put him first above all else, because that's the most important thing we could ever do. So, guys, if you've never decided to follow Jesus, I encourage you to do that. It will be the best decision you could ever make. In the description below, you could click a link to help you to decide to follow Jesus for the first time. I encourage you to do that today.